Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted more motivation in your life, then do we have the show for you. Today I'll be talking with Dan Ariely, TED Talker Extraordinaire, James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University, a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight, and the author of the New York Times bestsellers Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, and The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, and a new favorite book on motivation, Payoff. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about the hidden logic that shapes our motivations and how in the world to find more of it. That plus we'll talk about climbing mountains, Lego love, why we don't want to be Sisyphus, the power of the number 42, what we can all learn from IKEA, what we need to know about cake mixes, and why in the world you need to put up walls if you want to sell your house. So welcome to the show, Dan. Are you ready to shine?
I will certainly try. I have to, a quick warning is I just flew from Copenhagen, Denmark to San Francisco. So I'm a little bit jet lagged, but this was a lovely, exciting introduction, and I can see all the lines that you're trying to reconnect. It sounds exciting.
Excellent. So then I'm going to give you a mighty woohoo, and we'll do what we can to keep you right side up as you're flipped upside down.
Very good.
So before we dive right into things, would you mind if we go back in time and tell us a little bit briefly about what happened to you as a child?
Yes. So maybe a good way to start this is to describe my beard.
Perfect.
So I just turned 50, and to celebrate, I went on a month-long hike.
Mm-hmm.
I did what's something called the Israel Trail. It goes from the north to the south of Israel. I guess you could do it the other way around. And I didn't shave. I didn't shave for a month, and after that, I kind of liked it. So this was last month, and so I trimmed it a bit, but I kept it. So that's the reason for this side. And then this side, I don't have hair. And some people think it's a fashion statement. It's not. I was just burned. So when I was young, I had the misfortune of standing next to a magnesium flare, one of those bombs that the military sends up to the sky to light up a battlefield, mm-hmm. and that one exploded next to me. Very hot magnesium. For a long time, and I was burned in about 70% of my body, and I basically spent the next 3 years in hospital. And hospitals are, they're terrible environments, actually, when you think about it from what they're designed for. And there were lots of things in hospitals I didn't like. And I started becoming interested in what can we do better. So it started being very selfish, mm-hmm. saying, I don't like bandage removal. I didn't like how they gave us pain medication. There were some other treatments I didn't like.
They must have called you. I have twin titanium femurs and twin titanium hips, and I've had over a dozen operations myself. Nothing to compare, but they'd start calling me a what was it? Not troubled patient, a problem patient or something, because I was looking at my own best interests.
Yes, there was one point in which the nurse told me that the word patient doesn't mean to butt in; it means to be patient. Okay, so I tried to do this. Actually, this hike we just did. So I did it with Ron, a friend of mine, my best friend from 7th grade, mm-hmm. and every day we invited people to join us. Some people we knew, and some people we didn't know, and we had a few rules of the trail. The first rule was that what he said on the trail stays on the trail. The second rule was that no phones from 7 to 7. And then the third rule was that everybody introduces themselves with an embarrassing story. And, I didn't, I have an amazing supply of embarrassing stories. But one that I didn't think about for years, but I told on this trail. So maybe this is 2 years after my injury, mm-hmm. and I have a friend in occupational therapy, And she's not injured that badly at that time, but she has something in her shoulder that it makes it hard for her to lift her shoulder. But basically outside of that, she seems healthy. And she tells me that I need to go on a date. And she has a friend, and she's going to set me up. We pick a day. She drives me. I can't drive at the time. We go to the beach to meet her friend. It's kind of a place, a little cliff overlooking the beach, and we eat ice cream. And it's maybe 5 minutes into this organized date, and her friend asks me something about hospital. And I don't know why, but I go into a deep, painful description of one nurse that I just hated. There was one nurse that was cruel and vile and with no compassion and no patience, and I hated that nurse. I would try to find out when he had shifts, and I would try to avoid those shifts. I would try to rearrange my treatment so that he would never treat me. If he was on duty on the weekend, I would try to get them to operate me on Friday so I have no treatment on week. I mean, it was just like my life. And I go, this poor woman, she asked me some naive, simple question, and I go into this tirade. I didn't talk about this nurse for 2 years. Like, it was the first time, and I just go and go and go and describe how much I hated him, how much he, Anyway, I finished these 15 minutes of a hate speech. And I breathed deeply, like the first time I talked about him. And she says, "What's his name?" And I say his name, and she stands up, and she says, "It's my father." And she turns around and leaves, and I've never seen her since.
Wow.
But the free association came because, most of the people in the hospital, the hospital is a terrible system with mostly good people, but also with some bad actors. But anyway, so I spent 3 years in this rather oppressive, difficult environment, but spending my time, either trying to avoid pain or trying to think about how can I, engineer my life in a better way. And when I left the hospital, I started thinking about, how do we make hospitals better? And then I started thinking about more generally, how do we make all systems better, right? If the nurses kind of are actually creating extra pain and not treating the patients correctly, where else are we making mistakes? Where else are we designing systems that are not letting the max of human potential emerge and instead create too much misery?
So I want to pause you for a brief second. Thank you for sharing all that. I want to go back to one perfect example of this, which is the pulling off of bandages. Daily, you had to have the bandages removed, and then they would basically, I'm going to guess, for lack of another term, debride or scour them until they got to fresh bleeding tissue. Then they cream it and oil it and wrap it back up, and they would pull the bandages off as fast as possible.
Yeah, their theory, by the way, it wasn't every day, because the day after surgery, I had the break, which is why I would try to have surgery on Friday to avoid this nurse on Saturday. But yeah, their theory was that the quick ripping approach is the one that creates the least amount of pain. And it's the theory, if you think about it, is that it's all about duration. That if we shrink the experience of pain, we sacrifice intensity, but we make it short, that's a better experience, right? That somehow the duration matters a lot. And as a patient, you experience this high intensity pain. It is just terrible. And I would try to get them to get things to be slower. I said, let's stretch it over time. Let give me breaks in the middle. And they had a very strong hypothesis or theory, that actually conviction, that what they were doing was the right thing. So they basically said they know what they were doing. The quick ripping approach is the right approach. It's the way to create the least amount of pain. It's the best way to treat people. And when I left the hospital, and I started learning about the experimental method. What's nice about experiments in social science is you can have a theory of how life works. You can submit it to this mechanism called experiments. You can have one treatment like this, one treatment like this, and see what happens. And it turns out that they were wrong. It turns out that the way we integrate experiences, so imagine you have time and you have intensity, and you have something that fluctuates over time. And the question is, what good experiences, what is the pattern of a good experience that creates the most happiness? For example, we have dessert at the end, right? So we have a meal, dessert. And if we had dessert in the beginning, it would be dessert, meal. We think intuitively that dessert at the end is better. It creates an overall better impression of the meal. So if you think about this, you can say, what is it about the pattern that takes good experiences and makes them better, and takes bad experiences and make them not as bad? And one parameter is this duration. Do we chunk the intensity, the duration, but increase the intensity? And I tried all kinds of experiments on this, and it turns out that nurses were wrong in many ways. It turns out that we pay attention to the intensity much more than the duration. If you take an unpleasant experience and you double it in time, you haven't doubled the feeling of intensity. So, if this podcast was twice as long, it wouldn't be twice as pleasurable, or twice as memorable, or twice as painful. It would change a little bit, but not by much. But on the other hand, if we had moments that were either incredibly good or incredibly bad, that would influence it. Also, if the progression is positive, if things get better over time, it colors the whole experience. And the last moment also matters a lot. So, but by the way, if you think about this principle of designs, even outside of pain, you could look at all kinds of things that we do, and you would say, that's just not a good idea. Think about hotels. What is the most miserable moment in a hotel? Is when you check out and you have to pay the bill, right? Your last experience of the hotel is an unpleasant part of it. Or even vacations. Think about vacation. We go on vacation. We spend so much time, so much money, so much effort. And then the end of it, delayed flights, getting home, doing the laundry, somehow we created the end of the trip. Nobody thinks about it, right? But it's such a letdown at the end of the experience. So we either need to think about the vacation as ending before we get home, right? So it's kind of categorized a different experience. But once you start thinking about this question of intensity and pattern over time, you can see lots of places where we should re-engineer our experiences differently.
There was an experiment, I don't even remember which book I had read about I think colonoscopies.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know that one well enough, but that sort of falls in that same line.
Absolutely. So this is experiment by Donald Riddlemeyer and Danny Kahneman. And what they basically do is they look at colonoscopies. And colonoscopy is an unpleasant experience. And if you think about it again, there's time, there's fluctuating intensity. Actually, let's make it it's negative, right?
Yeah.
And some of the people just got the regular colonoscopy, and then they pulled the probe up. And some people got the same colonoscopy for whatever duration, and then they left the probe in the anus for another 5 minutes. So imagine that the experience is not so good, and then at the end, it's not that bad compared to it, right? So when the probe is just sitting there, it's slightly negative, but it's not as terrible as the colonoscopy. So what you have is a colonoscopy that is terrible, or a colonoscopy that is terrible plus 5 minutes of something not as bad. But that thing by itself is not positive. And what happened is that people remember the second one, the one plus the 5 minutes, as being better. Because we don't pay as much attention to duration. So adding 5 minutes is not a big deal. But also because the last moments really matter for the experience, right? It's kind of like the dessert of the experience. So what happened is we could add sometimes even more pain, like in their experience, right? Add something uncomfortable. But because it is timed well, it's at the end of the experience, and it's not as bad as the rest of it. It basically decreases the negative average, right? It makes it not as bad. It colors the whole experience in a better way. Wow. And it's a really good lesson for life.
Let's go from there, and I want to talk briefly a little bit more about your history, and then dive into motivation here. Where were your gears must have really been turning through this hospital experience, and I'm wondering, once you got you never got past the pain, but what were you thinking towards the end of it, and how did it? Were you like shot out of a cannon once you got back into school after that, or what were things like?
So actually, when I was initially in hospital, I was consumed by pain. There's an expression, pain people, which is basically the idea that once you experience intense pain, there's really nothing else. Mm-hmm. There's no tomorrow, there's no in an hour, it's just, you're just focused on the pain and trying to manage and deal with it. And of course, there's also lots of fear, because there's the pain of being burned, which is difficult, but then there's the pain of treatments, which was much worse. So I would say that initially I was probably like a deer in the headlight in terms of thinking. There was not much thinking beyond pain and beyond how do I escape or reduce or do something with the next period. Yeah. So there wasn't that much thinking. It only when I got better, I could start think, and I started reading medical journals and started having ideas about my my treatment. But the thing about burns that I didn't know, and I don't think people know, is that extensive burns don't go away. So as a kid, we all had burns, and they all go away at some point. And I thought, okay, I got burned. It's 70% of my body, but it will go away. The skin would heal. But you look at my hand. It's still very, very scarred. How can that be? What? By the way, it's kind of amazing thing, right? Cells rejuvenate all the time. Why do these cells choose to rejuvenate like a scar? Right? It's kind of an amazing, sad but amazing thing the body does, right? You could say, think about the liver. If you have a scar in the liver, your liver changes its cells every 8 to 12 days. Mm-hmm. How can we have scarring of the liver? But what happens is the new cells arrive, and they take the characteristics of the scar. But anyway, so the initial period was just focusing on pain. Then I was getting better. The skin was covered at least with transplants. So I had lots of skin transplants. Basically, my thighs are not burned. So they would take a little something that looks like a cheese slicer. This thing that you put on the cheese and you slice it. And they would take one of those. Of course, put me to sleep. They would take thin slices from my thighs. Mm-hmm. Only the epidermis, the top layer of the skin, and a little bit of the dermis, very precise. Because if they took a skin that was too thick for my thighs would not heal. So they would take the kind of layer that would be enough to transplant, but not thick. And then they would take that, they would put it through a machine that made it into a mesh. They would scratch my skin with a metal brush to start my flesh to bleed, and then they would wrap it. And the little holes were that if there was still blood, it would go through. And then that hopefully would catch to the flesh. It would never be good skin because it doesn't have the full thickness. So it's very, very thin skin, and that's basically what my body is covered with. But then as I was getting better, two things happened that made it actually more difficult. The first one is that I kind of learned how to deal with the hospital environment. They would take me on a stretcher to the bath. There was food. I had a tube feeding me. There's all kinds of things that are. I got used to it, and then getting back to life was actually very strange. I remember the first time when they took the tube out and I had to eat. It felt so bizarre. It felt unclean and too effortful. I was so used to having this tube just feeding me. By the way, this tube would feed me about 7,000 calories a day.
Wow.
And 30 eggs a day to try and get my body to rebuild. Or I remember the first time I went home, they allowed me to go home overnight to sleep at home. And when I got home, my dog jumped on me. And of course, I couldn't deal with this because of the scars, and it was terrible. And it kind of confronted me with all the things I couldn't do. Or there was, I took a bath on that day, so I went in the bath and I lowered myself, and removed some of the bandages and so on, and then I had to get out of the bath, and I couldn't remember how you get out of the bath. Like, what do you do? What hand do you put? Where do you put it? I mean, you probably don't remember either, but you don't have to pay attention because
I got
your
stuck
body.
in a bed after getting out of the hospital. My first time I left home, I got stuck in a bed because it didn't have rails or a pull-up, and I couldn't figure out how to get out of the bed.
Yep, and all of a sudden I realized how supportive the hospital environment was, and because I managed to do things in the hospital, I didn't realize how limited I was. So that was tough. But maybe the toughest thing about getting better, actually there were two things. One is that socially when I was in the hospital, I didn't meet anybody new, or everybody I met kind of knew I was in the burn department. But getting to the world as somebody who's seriously injured is not easy. Going to studying at the university was very tough. Kind of socially, people were very nice, but it's very isolated. At that time, I was wearing pressure bandages. So there is this idea that if you wear a mask and a shirt and gloves and pants and feet of this very tight brown fabric that puts pressure on the scars, the idea is that the scars would not contrast as much, would not grow as much. It would be better. So I was wearing this torture device for a while, but it makes me very different. Like, imagine I'm covered. The only thing you can see is my eyes. I have 2 holes for the nose, mouth, and ears, and that's it. The rest of it is this brown thing. I had a hat on top of that. A few contraptions on my hand to hold my fingers up and so on. And then it's also so difficult to walk in because it's tough. So you walk a little bit like a robot. It doesn't create for a lot of social interactions. But another one of the toughest things. So that if you think about it, like there's a sense of getting better. And the moment I got better, and I could start participating in regular life, I realized how injured I really was. I realized the social challenges, but physiologically, the other thing that happens is that the scars start shrinking. So one of the things with scars is that they are active. And so, for example, and now it's 30 some years later, it's not as bad. It's really, really not as bad. It used to be terrible. And it used to be that if I went to a movie and I sat with my hands, kind of just on the arms, and my legs bent, that after an hour and a half, I couldn't straighten my hands and my arms. And I would have to, start slowly stretching. And sometimes I couldn't reach a full stretch. And then they would try the next day in physical therapy to stretch it. And if they couldn't, they would have to operate again and give it. The scars would shrink so violently. You know how the kids do Indian burn?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the kind of the feeling that I had to work against my skin. So it was very difficult on the neck, right? Kind of pushing. It's a very tough skin. So if you look at this, every time I move, the whole thing moves. So if I move this, my whole
All your skin pulls when you turn your head.
all skin, because it doesn't have the same flexibility as the regular thing, and it shrinks. So that feeling of, on one hand, getting better and feeling I'm getting better, but then getting the scars to start being so active and so much against me. It was a tremendous feeling of betrayal. Right? That I can imagine this happens to other injuries as well, when you feel that your body is just, rather than your tool, is working against you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, that was tough, and it came at the sense when I was feeling there's a progress, and then you get this tough thing. So and but I did find happiness in studying, and I found happiness in research, and I had fantastic mentors at the university, and that really was wonderful and changed my life.
Thank you so much for sharing. I want to dive briefly into the book, and everybody's going to want to go out and get the book so you can learn more about motivation. But you got into a field called irrational behavior, and maybe you can share with us real briefly about that, and more importantly, how did you use irrational behavior to convince your now wife Sumi to marry you?
So the general field is a field that is kind of between economics and psychology, and the official name is behavioral economics, and the idea is that in economics we assume that people are perfectly rational agents, right? We feel that people are always make the right decision. You just give them the information, they can compute. We have no emotions. We always make the right decision, and in behavioral economics, we don't assume anything. Instead, what we do is we put people in different situations, and when we put people in different situations, we see how they behave. Now, so one thing is that we look at how people behave. We find that unsurprisingly, people text and drive, people overeat, undersave, procrastinate, can't keep attention. I mean, there's just a million things that we don't do well, and those things are very damaging. If you think about texting and driving, it kills us, right? The same thing as obesity and diabetes. Now, it's not as if every time you smoke or eat too much you're dying, but you don't have to do it all the time. We've designed society such that we fail a lot, mm-hmm. and we create lots of damage as a consequence of this. And economics is a field that is both descriptive and prescriptive. Descriptive means that economics has a theory about how the world works, and we think this theory is it captures something about human behavior, but it's not perfectly correct. And then there's the descriptive part, where economists say, I know the answer, I have a great theory. If you're going to build a healthcare system or educational system or whatever, trust me, here are the principles to build it. And that's the place where things are wearisome. So, as you know, one of my research areas is dishonesty. Mm-hmm. I bring people to the lab, I tempt them to steal some money from me. I see when people steal more, when people steal less. So we have a very nice movie on this dishonesty on Netflix. but think about something like the death penalty, right? What is the theory of the death penalty? The theory of the death penalty is that you will think forward. You will come home. You will be pissed off with your significant other. You will go to the kitchen. You will take out a big knife. And then you would say, we have a death penalty in this country, in this state. Let me do something else, right? That somehow you would think about the future. You would think about the consequences of killing somebody. And you would say, let me not do it because of the death penalty. Mm-hmm. But when we look at the data, we find no evidence that the death penalty has any effect on behavior. States that have the death penalty don't have a different crime rate that states that don't. So what happened is we have a theory that says people think long term, they think about the consequence of their actions, but they don't. So what we have is we have policies that are just ineffective, or texting and driving. The simple solution seems make it illegal, give people fines. You know what happens in states that make it illegal and give fines? Accident and death rate goes up. Why? Because instead of texting over the wheel, people start texting under the wheel. Right? So what happened is that if we have a wrong theory of human behavior, whether it's motivation or planning or saving or how people decide how to eat or what medications to take, whatever it is, and we don't have the right theory, we would implement laws and regulations that are ineffective. So that's actually why I care, right? Because if economics was just a descriptive study, like anthropology, and it would basically say, hey, we have a theory about human behavior, and here's how part of human behavior works, that's fine, it's great. But the moment you say, let's build the world with this in mind, then I want it to be more correct. That's the issue. So my lab at Duke, what we're doing right now is most of our research is on financial decision making. We're trying to figure out what kind of things people don't do well and how can we make things better. Health is another big area. And then we have a third area where we're doing both health and financial decision making for the very poor in Africa. And that's kind of a separate unit because the people in that group travel a lot, and there's a lot of unique aspects about Africa. So
if we look at motivation, and hopefully we have time to double back because I want to hear about Sumi here, but if we look at motivation, what is going on? Because, for instance, we'll use health as an example. I want to get healthy. I want to go to the gym so that I don't have blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. That's not working because we're not thinking long term. What would work?
Yeah. So first of all, you're absolutely right. The problem with health is that all of our decisions about health are sacrificing something now for something good later. Think about medication. There's not a single medication that is fun to take today. It's just not, right? What's fun today is to not take the medications, right? So there's something we call hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting is the way that we think and discount the future. So imagine the following question. Imagine I said, I have the best chocolate in the world. What would you like? Half a box of this chocolate now or full in a week? Half now or full in a week? And I'll give you the chocolate, you can smell it. Incredible. Most people say, give me the half now. Not worthwhile to wait another week for another half a box of chocolate.
Yeah.
But then to another group, we say, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a half a box of chocolate in a year or a full box of chocolate in a year in a week? It's the same discount rate. It's asking you whether you're willing to wait a week for another half a box of chocolate. But right now, you don't want to. You want immediate gratification. In the future, we're perfectly patient. A year, I can wait another week. There's no problem. But of course, in a year, you'll be in the exact same situation. You could say, I could have it now, but I have to wait another week. So what happened is that when the now comes, we get tempted. Think about it. Chocolate is far away, not tempting. The moment it gets close in time or distance or proximity, and you start smelling it, you're being tempted. And all of healthcare is like that, right? It's about exercising. It's rarely the case that exercising right now is more fun than every other thing that you could do. It's rarely the case that medications are good, and donuts are good for a reason, right? I mean, it's just not the case that kale is more appealing to us than donuts. I mean, we can try and make it so, but nature got us to love fat and sugar. That's just how we build. So there's this very sad study that looked at when people die, how many of us die quicker than we needed to because of bad decisions. Like a bad decision would be you get drunk and drive into a tree and kill yourself, or you text while driving. All of those things are bad decisions, and they basically ask what is the percentage of human mortality that is either basically accelerated by bad decisions. And what they saw was that 100 years ago, the percent was about 10%. Think about 100 years ago, how could you make a bad decision and kill yourself? And now the percent is more than 43.
Wow.
What happened? Are we getting more stupid? No. But what's happening is that we're creating an environment that tempts us more to make bad decisions. Right? Think about 100 years ago, donuts were not around. Phones were not around. Smoking was not around. So what happened is that we're creating actually an environment that is taxing us and getting us to fail for temptation all the time. And one of the principles in behavioral economics is that the environment matters. This is what is called choice architecture. That we make decisions as a function of the environment that we're in. And so imagine that you're walking down the street and your environment is every store around you and every billboard and every app on your phone. And ask yourself, what does this environment want from you? How much of this environment is about your long-term well-being and how much of it is about their short-term well-being? And the answer is that mostly around their short-term well-being, right? Every coffee shop wants you to buy another croissant today. Every app wants you to check the app one more time today. There's really, and what happened is that because they control the environment, they control to a very large degree our actions. And one, I think, of the big question is how do we get to live in our agenda, right? So, you're working on your computer and you have a project you care about, and other people have other agendas, right? Somebody is sending you email, and advertisers have their own agenda. So, they design Facebook to be very appealing and tempting, and you want to check it. And so basically, we're bombarded by attempts to derail us and get us to make decisions that are not in our best accord, and we fail. We fail a lot, and as a society, we have to admit that it's probably only going to get worse.
So how do we start to restructure our environment or restructure things? People come to me for coaching, and one of the biggest challenges is motivation, which is on the surface people are motivated, but if they're not deep down motivated, there's nothing we can really do with them.
I'm not sure, by the way. I'm not sure that...
I was hoping you'd challenge me on that.
So, it's kind of an interesting thing to say what is really motivating. I think it's very easy to derail us, and we need to create an environment that it's very hard. So let's just take an imaginary situation of somebody who says that they want to write a book.
Perfect.
And they say they want to write a book, and they come to talk to you, and they say, I have this plan to write a book, but it's been 6 months, and I only wrote 3 pages. And now you say, here is what I want you to do. I want you to go to this place in the desert that has no internet connection. And I just want you to do 3 things. I want you to walk, sleep, eat, and write. 4 things.
Okay.
What are the odds that after 3 months in that place with no temptation and distraction, that person would not have written something? Right? I'm willing to bet that everybody who even says that they want to write would actually get things going. The problem. It's not that I disagree with you that people vary on the degree of motivation, and we can help people to be more motivated. But I think a big force is that we design our environment in a way that lets other people hijack our time.
Yes.
So, we used to study a lot work habits, and people basically have 2 productive hours during the day, sometimes 3, but it's just not that much. And for most people, those are morning hours. Let's say between 9 and 11.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a common pattern. People basically kind of feel when their hours are. And if you ask people, you have these 2 precious hours a day, what are you doing with them? Most people are doing mind-numbing tasks. So you get to the office, you have a cup of coffee, you chat with somebody for 5 minutes, and then you sit there and you have 100 emails.
Mm-hmm.
And you start answering 100 emails, and your mind races, because there are things about Facebook and email is that it's not a single task. It looks like it's email, but it's really not. You're basically task switching all the time. You're not concentrating on anything. You just jump. It's exhausting thing to do. And by the time you're finished, you're depleted, you're exhausted, and you've wasted your 2 most productive hours on things that don't need that much concentration. So I think a big part of it is, how do we redesign our environment to be effective? I'll tell you one thing I used to do, and I stopped. I used to have 2 desks in my office, mm-hmm. with 2 computers, and one computer had only work things, and the other one had work and everything else. Right? So at that time, I didn't have a browser, for example, on that computer. It was just statistical software and ways to write things, but that was it. Right? And the reason it was an interesting system is that because the switch from work to non-work was very deliberative. Mm-hmm. Right? So right now, I'm talking to you. I, by the way, turn all notifications off. So if you look at my phone, I don't know if you can see, but there's this little moon thing.
Yep.
And I basically try to keep it on all the time. And what it means is, if people call me, it goes to voicemail. And if I get notifications, I don't know about them. I look at this thing every hour or 2, but it's on my time.
Yes.
If we that period, by the way, when the decision from moving from desk to desk was so explicit, the beginning was kind of shocking to me about how effective it was, and it stopped being effective when I started traveling so much, because eventually I don't have 2 laptops and I have only one, and my desktop is just not a useful machine because I'm so much on the road. But I think we could do all kinds of things for our environment that would decrease distraction. I'll tell you one other thing about distraction that is incredibly disturbing. Mm-hmm. Here's the experiment. You take a group of kids, college students, and they solve math problems. And you say, please solve those math problems as fast as you can. We'll pay you $1, let's say, for each question you solve. They solve, they work. At the same time, you take their phones and you put them on the side and you find out their phone numbers. And from time to time, you call them or you text them.
Oh, no.
Now they're told they're not allowed to pick up the phone. They just work on math problems. But what happens is, you can see when you call them or text them, you see the reduction in performance. Mm-hmm. And that reduction doesn't go away when the phone ring goes off and the buzz goes off. It's not just down and up. It goes down, and then it takes about 15 minutes to slowly come up again. 15 is the worst case. But what happened is that we've created an environment that continuously distracts us. Right? So when you think about motivation, sorry for such a long answer, but when you think about motivation, I think we can ask, what is the real motivation? Mm-hmm. It is a good question. And how much are we created in the terms of blocking it? Like, look at health, right? Don't people, standard economists believe in what is called revealed preferences. Mm-hmm. You say, if you say that you want to be healthy, but you eat a cheeseburger every day, you don't really mean that. This is what's called revealed preferences. What your preferences are is what you do. But if you say, look, you work in a hospital, and when you go to the cafeteria, it's either a burger or fried chicken. I mean, by the way, foods in hospitals are amazingly bad quality. You can look at this, or you could say, you know what, it's really hard to make good food, and you live in a food desert. I mean, and McDonald's is very easy, and you're tired, and you don't want to make more decisions. So there's underlying preferences, and economists think that underlying preferences translate into behavior. We think also a lot about barriers, what we call friction. And
it was one of my questions I had for you is the barrier you put in the way of a bicycle ride, just going 1 mile, but you put a barrier there. You have to clean something in the sink, but there's a bowl in your way, and so you leave it for later. These little barriers.
These little barriers are amazing, and you know, the more we study decision making, the more we are finding out how big those barriers is. I'll give you one crazy example. When you go to work, you go to your employer, and you basically have a direct deposit form that takes your salary and puts it into your bank account. It's a great form. No bank, no employer I've seen allows you on that form to also split your salary between checking and savings. You basically have to have one form to transfer the money, and then a second form that you have to find somewhere that sends some money automatically to savings. That's just not the right answer. It can't be. We have to put some money in savings. But the form doesn't make it the easiest as possible. And this is what we call the path of least resistance. And it's incredibly, as a strategy for life, it's incredibly useful to say, where is my life organized in a way that the easiest thing to do is not the thing that I actually want to do. And I think that if you try to re-engineer your environment according to the path of least resistance, you would get more of your true desire to be expressed.
I call it tripping over success. You want to be able to trip over your habits. If something is tied to the doorknob, it's going with you, or tied to your shoe. I've got 3 really quick wrap-up questions for you. First off, where can people go to find out more and to find your book and to find your blog where you're answering questions like this for people on a regular basis?
So my blog is at danariely.com, DANARIELY.com, and lots of materials there.
Fantastic. And secondly, as parents, what would you tell parents to help either re-engineer the environment for the kids or to help kids with motivation?
So that's a very long question, but I would say in general that kids have a harder time than us thinking about long term. So if you think about the general term gamification is about creating things in the short term that reward behavior is good for us in the long term. And things like gamification are incredibly helpful for us, but also for kids.
Fantastic. And any last words of wisdom on motivation you want to share with people today?
Okay, so we have this thing called the right to pursue happiness. And I don't think that happiness is the thing that we should pursue. If you think about happiness as being sitting on the beach, drinking mojito, watching Seinfeld, whatever it is, it's nice from time to time, but the full life of happiness, defined this way, it's probably not the life that anybody wants. The strange thing about life is that I think what we really want is a sense of meaning. And meaning is very different from happiness. Meaning comes from difficult things that are complex and take a while. It's about forging friendships. It's about writing books. It's about starting companies. It's about all kinds of things. And when you do these things, it's not as if every moment is happy. Right? If you run a marathon, you're not really smiling every moment that you're running. But it's things that are bigger and more consequential. And I think that we need to, when we think about what should we strive for, I think we should think about how do we maximize this bigger happiness at a different time frame, which is happiness not at the moment, But happiness when you reflect on something and you say, I've done something amazing. I'm very, very proud of this. I'm happy I worked at this.
I love that. And in that meaning, one subset of that would be helping and serving others.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get payoff, and begin to find your own meaning and motivation, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. I have to run, but this was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!